Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu filling in for Riz Khan. While economic markets have been reeling over the recent financial crunch, another global crisis has evolved that is far more damaging and hurting a lot more people in the developing world. The soaring costs of basic foods have set off food riots in several places around the world. In Haiti, anger over food prices led to violent riots in which at least 5 people were killed. The country's parliament also fired the prime minister. And in Egypt, where food prices have doubled, rioters burned cars, smashed windows and clashed with police. Is it time to put the money where our mouth is? Quite literally. We take your calls in the show. You can reach us to the numbers there at the bottom of your screen. Today, as we take an in-depth look at the soaring food prices, I'm joined by Alan Wiseman, professor at the University of Arizona. He's also the best-selling author of the book The World Without Us, published last year. From New York, I'm joined by Bettina Lucia, spokesperson for the United Nations World Food Programme. And here with me in Washington is Kimberly Elliott, a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. Thanks all for being here.
Thank you.
Kimberly, let me start with you and look at some of the causes of this recent rapid increase in the price of staple foods. You've looked at some of the staple crops that are being diverted away from consumption as food for other purposes, especially for the manufacture of fuel. What have you found?
Well, the U.S. production of corn-based ethanol, which is the primary biofuel in this country, increased quite rapidly last year and has been increasing for several years. So that clearly has played a role in the surging price of corn. That has had some spillover impact on wheat markets because they can be, the farmers will shift from planting corn to wheat in some cases, and also oil seeds like soybeans where the same effect is going on. I'm not sure how much that is impacting rice markets, and so I don't think that biofuels are by any means the only cause of these rising food prices. However, I do think it's appropriate to focus on biofuels because it is one of the few policy levers that we have available to try and do something about this crisis in the relatively short run. Both the European Union and the United States right now are subsidizing and promoting the use of biofuels. And these are very inefficient types of biofuels. These are so-called first-generation biofuels where the technology really hasn't advanced very much. So they're not really delivering environmental benefits, and they clearly are contributing to the food crisis. So even though it's not the only factor, I do think it's very important to take a new look at biofuels policy.
But are they delivering any benefits in terms of easing the energy crunch?
Actually, there's some new research suggesting that in fact the current biofuels, because they're shifting from food to fuel, that means the food has to be grown somewhere, which means that forests are being chopped down, which is releasing carbon dioxide. It means that grasslands are being plowed up to plant corn or soybeans or palm trees in Indonesia for palm oil. And so actually very recent science is suggesting that these things are a net negative for the environment as well. So we really need to rethink these policies right now.
Professor Wiseman, there are various factors that have come together at this time, which is creating this rise in prices of staples and also shortages in various parts of the world. It's also led to violence in some parts of the world as well. And one of those factors is the rapid growth in population. Now, that is something that you have looked at. Is it simply a case of many more mouths to feed?
Well, that's one of the many factors, and there's nothing that Kim just said that I disagree with. You know, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were 1.6 billion people on the planet, and then we had a couple of very interesting technological changes. One, medical technology lowered mortality rates and increased longevity, which I think is kind of nice. But agricultural technology, and particularly, you know, at the post-war the Green Revolution times in the 1950s, 1960s, we were told that this was going to solve hunger on the planet. But in biology, every time there is an increased food supply, the population of the species that lives off of it kind of rises to meet it. And in fact, that's what's happened. The world population doubled and then doubled again. And now we have, instead of no hunger on Earth, we have many times more hungry people. You add to that all the things that Kim was talking about, and we should also add that as rising oil prices are increasing the cost of transportation, and more we depend on long distance transportation for our foodstuffs, this is all contributing to high food costs, and competition over land to produce it.
Okay, let me go to Bettina Lucia, who's from the World Food Program. Bettina, the World Food Program has made an appeal for something like $500 million. What kind of response has the program had?
Yeah, I think everybody is realizing that we are facing this perfect storm where all of these various factors are coming together. The climate change, less harvests, more droughts, more floods, the high energy prices, which means that our transport costs have gone up by a lot. And also, of course, the food costs that have gone up. What the World Food Program is paying for is like 55% more than we did last June when we put our budget together. So we've made an urgent appeal to the governments of the world, the top 20, to really help us, because we are concerned that we will have, in not too far distance, we'll have to cut food rations to the people we are helping, or to cut the number of people that we are helping. What we are seeing is a new phase of hunger. We are now seeing especially urban poor. In the past, they might have been able, even if they were living off $1 or $2 a day, they might have been in the past been able to buy food. Now they no longer can afford the food. Let me give you also one example. In Afghanistan, the wheat prices have skyrocketed by like some 70% since last year. So we suddenly have to feed an extra 2.5 million people just in Afghanistan alone. And we made emergency appeals, and we're talking to governments, but we're still far away from reaching the 500 million that we need.
Professor Wiseman, there is one other aspect, and that is demand. There is some evidence that demand has increased as industrialization has taken place in previously developing countries, places like China, places like India. There is now greater demand there. How much of an effect is that having on current shortages of staples around the world?
Well, China is a country that's tried to control its population. They've made more of an attempt than almost any place else on earth, and yet there were already so many Chinese that the demand still increases. It doesn't increase quite as fast as it was increasing, say, 20 years ago, but it's enormous. I was in China in December, and not only are the numbers of Chinese increasing, but as their affluence increases, they are demanding more and more of the kinds of products that get exported from other areas, from areas of the tropics. And anytime the tropics are converted towards export luxury crops, so we and the rest of the world that can afford it can have off-season vegetables and fruits, that's taking land that could be used for growing locally in the tropics where most of the people on Earth live. So that's definitely a factor that's of great concern. And frankly, as China has more and more problems with their own environment, they have over-fertilized their lands to the point that they're killing off a lot of their rivers, which produce a lot of the fish that's an important part of their diet. They're just going to be demanding even more and more, and they've got the money to buy it, so it's going to be very, very strong competition. I was in Argentina last month, and Argentine food growers actually went on strike because and paralyzed the nation by blocking all the highways, because Argentina imposed higher export taxes, hoping to keep some food in the country so locals could eat it. But if they can make a lot more money on the world market, the food producers want to sell on the world market. So food is a commodity now, which may work nice as far as economists are concerned, but when we're talking about real human beings who need some food in their mouth, this is a crisis that we are facing, as Bettina has so described.
Okay, we have a caller on the line. This is Gary from Nigeria. Gary, go ahead with your call.
Yes, and thank you very much. I was going to find out and to ask probably, is there a deliberate attempt by some nation to that there's increase in food, especially in recent times where I saw the other day where there was wastage of grain from Israel into the sea, and then somewhere in Thailand also, where wastages of grain were also being disposed of. I want to suggest that is there a way there should be a kind of management of excess produce from the developed world to challenge such to the developing world, because I still believe that the issue of
Okay.
For uncontrolled excess waste is a problem too. Thank
All right.
you very much.
All right.
If I can say something to that, I don't think we have the days of the surplus foods that we saw 20, 30 years ago. Those days are gone. In the past, for example, in the United States, the surplus food was then donated to developing countries. Nowadays, it's all being bought to real prices. There is no longer a surplus. We are seeing the lowest food reserves in some 30 years. And you know, any farmer and any trader can reach really high prices all over the world, in the developing world, in the developed world. The story of the food surplus is just simply over.
Kim, we have a question here. Sorry, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something to that. On top of the problems that Bettina's describing, every 4 days there are 1 million more people on this planet. That's how fast our population is growing. And this is clearly unsustainable. We have stretched the food supply by force feeding the land with more and more chemicals, and that's starting to backfire on us in many ways. Or we have scraped more and more forests away to grow more food, and we're losing migratory species that need those forests to cross the tropics, going from the southern hemisphere to the northern and back again. And those are species that help spread seeds, that help control insects, that help to pollinate our plants. We can't keep growing this way, and either we're going to start reducing our population through some controls, or nature is going to reduce it for us, and that's not going to be very pretty.
Kim, there's a question we have here from a viewer in Tehran, Iran, Nilufar, and it talks about subsidies. And he wants to know what we need is for most countries to become food sufficient and secure. Removing European Union and US subsidies will allow market forces to operate by making local production more profitable.
The issue of rich country subsidies, it is somewhat more complicated than it has been made to appear. You know, a year ago the issue was that rich country subsidies are depressing world prices and hurting developing country farmers. And of course now the concern is, well, if we remove those subsidies, it would worsen the current food crisis by raising prices. I think the couple of things to understand here, and I generally agree with the tenor of the question, because the effects of a, you know, for example, a Doha round, which is the current international trade negotiation, would actually, it would not be to eliminate subsidies, but to reduce them fairly modestly, and that would probably have some small 2 or 3% perhaps impact on prices in a normal sort of market. But what it does do, and this is where I disagree with something that Alan was saying earlier, sort of criticizing the farmers in Argentina for protesting against the export taxes. Many countries now are putting restrictions on exports, and the problem with that, again, is that it decreases the incentives for producers in those countries in the future. And so it's understandable in the short run that governments want to keep food at home to lower prices for consumers, but it's both making the problem much more severe for countries that don't produce enough food and have to import it. It's driving up the prices for them, and it is reducing the incentives for farmers in those countries with export restrictions to continue producing in the future. And so I think that the basic tenor of the question is right, that what we need to do is to try and reduce the distortions, allow food to be produced where it is efficient, and to allow trade to fill the gap. So the idea that every country is going to become self-sufficient, I think, you know, that's something that many countries desire to do, but it's really not realistic, and it is at very high cost, either to consumers who have to pay a protected, you know, a price that's protected against imports, or to taxpayers because the government has to buy the food at a high price and then sell it at a subsidized lower price. And so I think that in the long run, those kinds of programs, while understandable in the midst of crisis, really don't help us to get a better functioning market that serves the most people in the most efficient way.
Okay, we will.
If I can add something, we, for example, as an aid organization, now buy 80% of the food in developing countries, so that we strengthen the local markets, that we strengthen the local small-scale farmers and the trade exchanges on the ground in the region, and that we also cut down on the expensive transport costs. So it's one way of trying to, you know, help with the current situation.
Could I just add to that, and as an American, maybe I'm in a better position to criticize U.S. policy, which does exactly the opposite. Most of food aid is bought in the United States and packaged here and then has to be shipped on U.S. flagged ships. So that
but that is a condition that is specifically attached to U.S. aid, isn't it?
Yes. Now, this is for U.S. food aid, but what it does is it drives up the costs, as Bettina was saying, of delivering that aid, so that for a given dollar budget, we're only able to deliver about half as much aid as we would be able to do if we didn't require that it all be purchased here and shipped on U.S. ships.
And you also have a situation here in the United States where aid that is approved by Congress, some portion of that aid has to go to long-term projects, so there's no funds available for emergencies like the one we experience right now.
That's actually an issue with the current Farm Bill. That's written into the current law, but there's a waiver. The Farm Bill that is currently being debated in Congress would either take away that waiver or make it very difficult to use. So you're absolutely right. In the midst of the current crisis, that would make things much worse than they are even now.
Okay. Ladies, gentlemen, we're going to take a break right now. Stay with us. Alan Reisman, Bettina Lucia, and Kimberly Elliott. Don't go away. There's plenty more to discuss. As we go to the break, let's listen to what some of you on the street thought about food shortages and rising prices around the world.
I think it's a combination of exponential demand for oil and energy, and the fact that now crops can be used economically to provide energy, and this is sort of snowballing out of control. So you have the crops being diverted to energy production, and you've got China and India economies growing so rapidly, and their demands are insatiable, it appears.
I'm from a third world country. And where we're from, you just struggle, and you struggle through it, and you go through it. So high food prices, that was just something that was there, you know. Now they got gas, and America's just been spoiled. No more spoiling.